all the carbon emissions initiatives they put in place, there's no evidence that it's done anything at all to improve our environmental impact. I would argue it's been much worse, for what I alluded to earlier, because all it is it's a wealth redistribution scam. You're giving the money and wealth earned by people, say, in the world using hydrocarbons, taking that from them through taxation or penalties, and you're shifting it to people who are not productive, which is generally the government, the administration.
There seems to be some real aversion, even among climate activists, to focus in on Scope 1 emissions and to say, hey, we're going to phase these out just like we did with CFCs. And I think that the reason why they can't take this same approach that they did in the past that was so successful is because society would collapse if they banned carbon emissions, right? If they phased out carbon emissions, it would be the end of civilization. It would be mass starvation. Lots of people would die.
What's up, Sats fans? Welcome to Swan Signal. We got another excellent episode.
If you care about your financial future, you need to check out a couple of our offerings, including Swan IRA and Swan Private. Swan Private is our white glove concierge service where you get a trusted partner on your Bitcoin journey. We offer all kinds of education and research projects, as well as exclusive events to our Swan Private customers. Check it out today at swan.com/private. Also, Swan IRA. Swan IRA is the best way to gain exposure to real Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged account, like a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, or rolling over your 401k. So if that interests you, check it out at swan.com/IRA today.
We got another excellent episode. Today, we're going to be focusing on the mining aspects of Bitcoin, as well as the energy industry itself. We got two great guests. We got Pierre Rochard, who's the Vice President of Research at Riot Platforms. And we got Steve Barbour, who is the CEO and founder of Upstream Data. So what's up, fellas? How are you doing?
Doing very
wonderful.
Well.
How are you doing?
Just listening to Steve on Marty Bent's podcast. So just feels like I'm continuing the conversation.
Oh, Steve, yeah. Steve, you were on Tales from the Crypt recently?
Yeah, Marty put it off the rails towards the end, so we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. He likes to do that, so.
Well, weren't you in a debate recently, like a Nakamoto forum debate series or something?
Yeah, that was the same day I did Marty's pod up in down in Austin. But yeah, I did a pretty fun little debate. It was the first, call it their inaugural. It was pretty interesting. I liked it because it wasn't your typical just sit up there on a panel. It was argue and sort of make arguments for and against. In this case, we're talking about you could just say the pros and cons of hydrocarbons versus other alternative energy sources on the grid for Bitcoin mining. So it was fun.
Right on. Well, let's talk about that. Why not? So Texas, I mean, Pierre, you're based out of Texas, and Riot has a lot of facilities out there, and you guys actually have a lot of renewables, right? So you guys have a lot of wind, solar, and what kind of issues do you run into when you're using a lot of renewables like that?
Do you want to take that, Steve? I'm happy to roll with
sure.
it.
Yeah, well, I'm not in Texas based. I actually have a lot of customers in Texas, mostly off grid. I've been personally my personal push in my company this year for what I'm going to focus on personally is getting in front of more of these bigger miners in Texas and trying to get our products sold on the grid. We've done a fair few projects on grid, just not in Texas yet. So we got our first one coming up in end of June, so I'm excited for that. But what I do know about the Texas grid, Texas has a huge abundance of energy, as we all know. Pretty much a good mix. But I think West Texas, you see a lot of wind, hell of a lot of wind over there now. Still lots of natural gas. There's a lot of glut of natural gas over there. So I know the project we're doing with this client is going to be wind powered in West Texas. And then, of course, you have a lot of coal and other thermals across the state. I do believe I'm not an expert on the Texas grid, but I do believe there's a good mix of coal and natural gas and even nuclear.
Yeah, I think Steve covered it. The one trend that we've seen, and I know Steve's a big coal fan, but just on purely on the economics, I think natural gas has been very competitive versus coal. Now, I know that there's also emissions regulations that are kind of tipping the scale as well in favor of natural gas. In terms of the economic impact, I mean, at the bottom line, it's that wind and solar are intermittent or unreliable, depending on who you're asking. But the um, the the basic reason is that sometimes the wind is blowing hard and sometimes it's not blowing at all, and obviously at night solar does not work very well. So that means that in a perfect world, um, human consumption of electricity would line up perfectly with wind and the sun. But the reality is that it does not line up perfectly at all. And so you see a lot of volatility in the price of electricity that is driven by these intermittent power generators that then you need to offset. You can offset that either with peaker plants, which could be natural gas, could be coal as well. You can offset it with batteries, which are extremely expensive and very capital intensive. Or you can offset it with demand response, namely turning off Bitcoin miners. So and then importing and exporting electricity, but we don't do a lot of that in Texas. So those factors have driven a lot of price volatility for the grid here in Texas, and that's something that I've been learning a lot about over the past several months as I dig deeper into the electricity side of the business. But yeah, that I think that there's especially with the New York Times article getting into carbon emissions, there's this desire to combine different policy debates. So they want to have, and I know that Steve just had a debate, so I'm not like attacking Steve or the Nakamoto Forum, but basically this idea that how we use electricity, right, and Bitcoin being a waste of electricity, then it transforms into a debate about how we produce electricity and whether we should be using natural gas or coal or wind and solar or nuclear. And I think that what has happened is that the environmentalist movement, and I'll put air quotes around environmentalists because I think it's really debatable whether these people are environmentalists or not in the true sense of the term. That they have found themselves in a trap where, one, they are very concerned about carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions in general, and so they're anti-coal and they're anti-natural gas. Two is that they're anti-nuclear. Now, why they're anti-nuclear, that part of me is like, okay, well, they're just old, and they were, around when Chernobyl happened, and to them, Chernobyl is like that is the definition of nuclear power. And there's also been a lot of propaganda that has essentially tried to associate nuclear power with nuclear weapons, and kind of instilling fear in people, of Armageddon. Which is as old as the human race, fears of Armageddon. And so the last choices they have remaining on the menu are solar, wind, and batteries. And those are really uneconomical as a package. And that's now what they have to turn to is saying, okay, we just have to consume less electricity because we can't produce more, so we have to consume less. And that is the end of civilization. Civilization is all about how do we produce and consume more electricity. That's the only way we increase our standard of living. There might be some things at the margin, but that's like 99% of how we improve our standard of living is by producing and consuming more energy. And so if they want to take the approach that we need to do less of that, then I think that really what they're talking about is murdering a large percentage of the human population in order to advance their agenda. So with that, I'll stop rambling.
That's good. Good way
Steve,
to end it. There.
I mean, Steve, so this intermittent nature of some renewables like wind and solar, is that part of your argument for why hydrocarbons are a more sustainable source of energy, or is there other arguments that you'd like to make around that topic?
Well, a lot of what I focus my arguments on in that short debate were the reality that that hydrocarbon-based energy, coal, certainly natural gas, power, it's only one stream of the product. If you're producing natural gas, you're likely producing oil as well. So, I mean, speaking Texas, in the West Texas, there's a huge amount of oil and gas reserves. Everyone's going after oil. They're not going after gas. They're just getting gas as a byproduct of that oil production. So that's partly why you see in Texas natural gas prices so low, and natural gas power generation economics are also low. Like the cost to produce the gas is extremely low. It's just a byproduct. So, I mean, in that debate, we're talking about the energy production and the sustainability of Bitcoin mining specifically, but the energy production from hydrocarbons in general is one part of a package. And as long as we continue to consume the raw material in goods and services, there's no path off of that, right? There's no believable way to get off of hydrocarbon molecules in plastics, in wall boards of your home. That's burnt coal. When you combust coal, it actually turns into product, into the aggregate of roads, into asphalt of roads. I mean, it goes on. The list is literally endless, and you cannot. No one has presented any viable means to actually eliminate hydrocarbon use. And as long as we're using these primary products in steel and manufacturing and in everything, then there's going to be call it a waste stream that we can still use for energy, specifically with natural gas, because natural gas, the associated gas, if we don't put it in a turbine, in an engine and generate power and sell it to the grid, we're just going to burn it in the air. If we don't sell it down a pipeline, it's just going to get burned in the air. And so, like, a big part of my argument towards generally why hydrocarbons are here to stay as a big energy source is simply because a lot of the product and the upstream costs to get the product to market are sunk costs. Like, they're already baked into the system, because we can't get off them for everything else. So we might as well use the waste streams for power generation. But of course, like, the root of my argument has always been on the line for years. Why are we wanting to get off hydrocarbons as an energy source? Because it seems like the mainstream qualifies, it's only qualifying our energy footprint based on carbon, equivalent emissions, which is arguable if that's even a net negative, that more carbon emissions is bad. It seems to be a pre-gone conclusion that more carbon dioxide and increasing atmospheric ppm it's been a foregone conclusion that is bad, but there's not conclusive evidence saying that that's the case. In fact, there's lots of evidence showing that we could actually use a bit more ppm in our atmosphere. And so to use that as a sole qualifier on what energy production methods to go with is insanity. In fact, like, it's absolutely crazy. But that is where we are today. We're qualifying different energy sources only based on the carbon emissions. And that's why I often, I try not to frame, what we should be doing for, say, power generation. And I don't legitimize carbon accounting methods. I think they're a fraud. It's a blatant scam. Pierre is actually an accountant, I believe, and he could probably lean into that more on the technical side. But from just a high level, all it is reallocating capital from people, if you're talking about carbon taxes, to government, and in the end it ends up just skewing capital allocation through through a fraudulent method, but a ineffective method, and it's actually probably creating more wasted resources than otherwise by giving the government more purchasing power to waste money. So yeah, I guess I ended up also going on a bit of a ramble. So
I've got another ramble ready in the can. So let's say that the climate change activists are 100% correct, and that increasing the ppm, not only is it going to melt the ice caps, but it's going to send us back to a time where there were jungles in Antarctica, and there were crocodiles down there. So let's just take that as a fact, and that it's going to cause a massive rise in sea levels, where large swaths of land that are currently occupied by humans will get flooded over the next 200 years, let's say. I mean, I think that's like the worst case scenario that they have on their in their prophecies, and their eschatology. So from a moral perspective, they would say, well, why are wealthy nations creating this massive cost on poor nations and creating this giant negative externality that's going to force lots of developing nations and people who are really marginalized and don't have the economic means to adapt? They're going to drown, or they're going to lose their assets because they're going to get flooded. And I think that the problem with that is really on the point about how to adapt to this new reality. It would be with lots of fossil fuels. That is, that if they have the energy systems in order to, build housing on higher ground, or to move to higher ground, and to have a prosperous standard of living, in that adaptation, that they're going to need to use fossil fuels. And I think that even though that sounds really, commercial, or like I'm downplaying the impact of having to move, which, I mean, I've moved lots of times in my life, so I don't want to downplay it. It is a nuisance to have to move to a different country. In my case, I moved from France to the United States, moved to the high ground, moved to Texas. So I don't want to downplay that or minimize it, but at the same time, that would enable them to have a higher standard of living. And the alternative proposed is to lower everyone's standard of living. And so really those are the two questions: is, do we lift people up and have rising standards of living and rising oceans? Supposedly, I mean, let's keep that in mind, that's still to be proven, because I personally, I have not seen evidence of rising oceans. Maybe I'll make a video about that next. Or the alternative is to lower everyone's standard of living so that we have fewer resources and less energy to adapt, not just to climate change, but to any change, right? Because we're looking at just climate change, but there's lots of changes happening that require constant human adaptation, just even outside of what we might call climate risk. So furthermore, just on the moral question, to say, oh, why are you forcing others to adapt to your lifestyle? Well, that's an argument that can be used in reverse as well. Why are you forcing people to emit less CO2 so that you can buy a villa in Martha's Vineyard, like former President Barack Obama, right? Why would we subsidize people who want to live on the coast in large mansions at the expense of middle America that is trying to, improve their lot in life and make create a better world for their children and grandchildren? And so I think that there's lots of unanswered moral questions that are just kind of assumed away. And then there's the economic questions, I think, are very hand wavy. I mean, when people talk about the cost of decarbonizing, um, I'm my accountant side is really scratching my head of, first of all, how do I verify all of this? Because they're using proprietary black box models that are not subject to peer review. And second, how to weigh these things, especially when we weigh kind of principles, right, of liberty and property rights. So how are these being factored into economic models or climate change scenarios? The reality, unfortunately, is they're not being factored in. It's kind of assumed that the UN controls all property on the earth, and the UN will decide how wealth gets allocated. So I think there's tremendous problems, both from moral, ethical, economic, and then just I almost want to say judicial, of how we're going to administrate this massive redistribution of wealth. So far, it seems like it's going to be entirely arbitrary and driven by a very elite group who are completely unaccountable, unelected, and illogical in their approach to this problem.
Yeah, it's interesting, the attack on hydrocarbons, how important a cheap, abundant energy resource is when you look at things like the standard of living and how it's directly correlated to energy consumption per capita, and how hydrocarbons have been so important for the last 100 years in terms of rising the standard of living, and now it's being attacked. And also, like, any kind of solutions in the energy industry, the actual solutions on the ground that are working, seem to be attacked as well. And instead, they're getting distracted with these carbon credit markets and carbon accounting, and not actually real solutions. But, Steve, with upstream data, I think it was like 2016, 2017, you started to post some articles and videos about how Bitcoin mining can be used at oil wells, and some of your work you shared around that. And I always thought it was really fascinating. And that narrative kind of taken off with upstream data over the last couple of years. How have you seen that change, like in terms of the interest or in terms of the education with some of these oil and gas producers of how Bitcoin mining can kind of help them adhere to some of these regulations, as well as make them more profitable and all the other benefits that Bitcoin mining can bring them?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, it went from something, if you guys remember back in 2016, mining was still in its infancy, like just becoming industrial, and it's changed a lot. I mean, back then, most people that I approached had no idea what it was we were talking about. So now there's been, there's really thousands of people in the industry educating people every day for the better. About how amazing Bitcoin mining is, just as a pure technology, like beyond what it is for a current, like a new monetary standard, but what Bitcoin mining itself is able to do to improve just general energy systems, right? The efficiency of power generation. You mean it's funny because when I started my company, I hadn't put a lot of thought into this whole carbon accounting scam. And as I learned about it more and more, and was forced to think about it more and more, you'll see that even how I market our products changed. Whereas we will say like it's an emissions reducer, but we don't lean into that as our primary like sales marketing. I more so talk about how we improve the efficiency of their production by monetizing what they're wasting. Whether it's whether you're like a power plant, curtailing energy, it could even be renewables, or if you're a coal plant and your heat rates are bad because you're not at nominal capacity because you're being offset by this glut of unreliable generation that decided, the wind decided to blow that day, and you're being forced to curtail your base load. Or you're an oil well and we're helping them stop venting and flaring. So I'm more focused now on the the monetization aspect of it, it's better economics to mine Bitcoin at your power plant than it is not to. And it's more efficient for your operation and for the grid when it's a grid project, or for your microgrid energy system to do this instead of your alternatives, which might be build pipelines if it's natural gas, install load banks, because we have customers doing that as well. So yeah, I mean, it's the narrative I've certainly changed, because I think it's a huge error for Bitcoiners, and you'll see me talk about it all the time online. I'll comment, like I'm always in your comments. If you tweet about Bitcoin mining is good for the environment and you're legitimizing it on carbon accounting, if you do that, you're actually just playing into their scam, because they're just going to move the goalposts again, and something will change, and you're no longer part of the clean tech brigade. They'll do something to make Bitcoin mining look bad again. So I just try to focus on fundamentals. It's you're monetizing what is otherwise wasted. The carbon emission side of it isn't important. In fact, I've been trolling recently nuclear, because nuclear doesn't emit carbon. So the forests are starving. They're absolutely starving. If we increase carbon atmospherically, that also apparently correlates to higher moisture in the atmosphere and more rainfall. So our deserts are dry, our forests are starving, and nuclear is not doing anything to help that. So I've been doing that more as a fun troll, counter troll online. Of course, I love nuclear. I think it's just better technology from a wide, for a wide array of reasons than, say, like baseload coal would be. But I think it's good. It's good to use that to illustrate, different that the whole aspect of carbon emissions accounting generally is just an absolute farce. And bear in mind, I mean, bear in mind, the only people actually, if you look at it objectively, all the carbon emissions initiatives they put in place, there's no evidence that it's done anything at all to improve our environmental impact. I would argue it's been much worse, for what I alluded to earlier, because all it is it's a wealth redistribution scam. You're giving the money and wealth earned by people, say in the world, using hydrocarbons, taking that from them through taxation and through subsidies, which is a allocation of taxation, or penalties, and you're shifting it to people who are not productive, which is generally the government, the administration, and similar, using the money that they'd never earned in the first place. So,
got it.
Yeah. So, okay. So the scam operates on so many different levels. First of all, emissions. So there are emissions that are bad. So sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter. These are pollutants that are bad for humans to breathe, and it is good to minimize those as much as we can, as much as the technology permits us to, and always balancing it with the benefits we have from emitting those bad pollutants. Right? It's a cost-benefit analysis, and so the amount of attention and energy, no pun intended, that the greenhouse gas emissions get is completely disproportionate to the scientific medical problems of pollution. And so, CO2 there's no problem. In fact, using my CO2 monitor, what I found is that just working at my desk, the CO2 levels around me went up to 1,000 ppm. I didn't pass out, It was, if you do some Google searching, they say that it'll lower your brain activity or something. But it's like, okay, open a window, go take a walk. So the amount of attention that carbon dioxide and GHG in general get is completely disproportionate to its real impact. Second of all, how the framework functions of what's called the GHG protocol is utterly detached from how this issue broadly has been approached up to this point. So if we look at when we were kids, the problem was the ozone layer. And I don't know if Steve has a different perspective on this, but I think the ozone layer was actually a real problem. And that we were emitting chemicals that were destroying the ozone layer and, were causing people in Australia to get skin cancer. And what the Montreal Protocol did was phase out, ban by government edict in particular, emissions of ozone destroying CFCs and whatnot. And so they did that, and then the ozone layer repaired itself, and now we don't talk about the ozone layer aside from talking about it as a success story. That by focusing on what today we would call scope 1 emissions and phasing those out, that we solved a problem. Now, in the case of GHGs, there seems to be some real aversion, even among climate activists, to focus in on scope 1 emissions and to say, hey, we're going to phase these out just like we did with CFCs. And I think that the reason why they can't take this same approach that they did in the past that was so successful is because society would collapse if they banned carbon emissions, right? If they phased out carbon emissions, it would be the end of civilization. It would be mass starvation. Lots of people would die, right? Not in the millions, in the billions. And so they are having to find very creative workarounds. And I think that they're also, interestingly, getting help from big oil. And I don't know if Steve's going to disagree with me on this or not. But what I found was that the GHG protocols were created in collaboration with British Petroleum and General Motors. And so they have these three categories of scope 1, direct emissions. These are actual greenhouse gas molecules being emitted by the owner of that asset. And so that makes sense to me. Okay, sure. Okay, scope 1, sure. Then you have scope 2, although, again, it doesn't really make sense to me because why are we doing inventory of scope 1 GHG emissions when we should be doing inventory of scope 1 particulate matter, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, lead, ground level ozone? These are way bigger problems from a health perspective, but okay, going on here. Scope 2 is, okay, if you are consuming electricity.
They're also already regulated, right?
They're already regulated, right?
Like that actual bad stuff is already reasonably regulated. So there's no scam to be had with that. That's why we don't generally see it.
I think you're onto something there. I think that's why the SEC is not coming out with disclosures around these things when the EPA is already on top of it. So then this scope 2 is, okay, you're consuming electricity. Indirectly, are you causing CO2 emissions because somebody else is producing the electricity and emitting scope 1 emissions? And so there, I think the scam is, and this applies to scope 3 as well, where indirectly is your supply chain, hand wavy term of, the whole economy emitting CO2. And there, I think that really the tremendous scam is, one, this theory of causation. So you'll never find this theory of causation to really hold water in any other context, because you could say the people who were anti-nuclear activists have caused these CO2 emissions just as indirectly as somebody turning on a light switch. The level of causation is, we could debate which one's stronger. I think the anti-nuclear person is far stronger in their level of causation than the person turning on the light bulb. There's that problem. And then there's the problem of double and triple counting. And so one person's scope 2 emissions is somebody else's scope 1 emissions. And then there's the problem of, okay, if I lower my scope 2 emissions, but that comes with increasing my scope 3 emissions by twice as much, let's say, which is better? What's the trade-off? Or if I can lower my scope 2 emissions and increase my scope 1 emissions less, then what's the equation between the different scopes? The answer is there is none. It's all made up. And so it raises the policy question of
there you go.
What is the purpose of having scope 2 and scope 3? Because if we decrease scope 2 emissions in a vacuum, that does not mean less GHGs are being emitted. Only decreasing scope 1 emissions would decrease GHGs in real physics terms, in chemistry terms, right? And so there's not really any purpose to having scope 2 and scope 3 other than, one, reducing the responsibility of scope 1 emissions by big oil saying, hey, look, these are not our emissions. They're your emissions. You're causing us to do this. It's your fault. Just like Bitcoin miners could say, we're not consuming electricity. People who hold Bitcoin are consuming electricity. They're causing the price of Bitcoin to go up. They're the ones causing these GHGs, right? So, and then the holders of Bitcoin would say, we're not the ones driving up the Bitcoin price. The Federal Reserve is, because they are, emitting more dollars, and that's causing us to hold more Bitcoin, and that's causing more Bitcoin mining. It's got more power consumption. So the levels of causation are infinite, and then ultimately, what you get into is just proving the existence of God, right? That you're saying, oh, here's the prime cause, and we've the first mover is here we have a proof of the existence of God, and he is scope infinite, and he's the one causing all the carbon emissions. So we have to kill God or something, like it's really an absurd theological argument.
It really does
the
never end. Yeah, I mean, it never ends. Like this accounting thing. That's why I was calling it an accounting scam. I mean, the only people that win here are the bean counters and the people that administer it and the people that get to raise the money in the name of the environment, and the people, of course, that get to launder the money in the name of the environment, the people getting the money that's printed and it gets passed down the Cantillon chain to the privileged clean, like the clean people. I mean, that's the reality of it. And I mean, if you actually pare it all back and, what are we trying to do? We're saying that carbon is bad and we're going to create an accounting system for this to tax, to, penalize it. But we already have that in place. I mean, it's called money. You cannot, in the end, what we should be thinking about is minimizing cost input and maximizing output, right? Like profit. If you're going to consume, if you're a coal power plant, you want to put out the most electricity for the least amount of coal. Okay, you want the most efficient process possible. You could look at any system. It's all about minimizing costs and maximizing output. And that's already accounted for in dollars, because everything made by man, whether it's raw material brought to the power plant or, the gasoline in Pierre's car here or whatever, the electricity in your battery, it all has a cost. It all reduces to man hours, and man hours all reduce to the consumption of our environment. So the entire premise of a carbon accounting system, when we already have a carbon accounting or a pollution accounting system, which is called just the economy, the more you spend, the more environmental resources you consume. That's simply the reality of it. You spend $1 million, versus someone who spends 100,000, you're 10x the environmental consumption of that person, that other person. And the funniest thing is, all the most richest people in the world are the biggest hypocrites, pushing for less consumption of our environment when they are the most per capita, per person. They're consuming far more than the average person out there. So really, we already have a carbon accounting system or a pollution accounting system or an environmental accounting system. It's just called money. It's just called spending money. So I mean, if you did
specifically sound money, Bitcoin.
Sound money and free market mechanism, yeah. If we had a freer market system that wasn't skewed by the government and their subsidies and taxation, then we would have a much better allocation of our environment than we have today. And of course, they're not going to, they're not going to go with that reality, because that means they have to give up their money printing machine for that reality to actually happen. So I find the whole, like, as entertaining as it is to talk about accountability events up, proving God exists, and I like to spin it as a scam and troll about it online. I find the entire topic of carbon accounting pretty much exhausting. Not only is it exhausting, but it's meaningless, and it's just like directing people towards the wrong. There is no problem there. There's other things to work on.
So what would you say, Steve, to that New York Times piece that came out, just another FUD piece, but really went after Riot, went after Bitcoin miners, said that they do generate greenhouse gas emissions, they're terrible for the environment, they jack up electricity costs. Like, what would you say to them by not adhering to those principles that are flawed that they're kind of adhering to?
Well, generally, I say, I think people generally are looking to optimize their own consumption, because that's sort of what profiting is. You're optimizing your own resource allocation, and that's all that really matters. I mean, that's where regulation comes in. Like we talked earlier, there's actually real toxins, from say burning coal, and that's not carbon dioxide, but there's different things like sulfur, NOx emissions, sulfur molecules coming out of the stack. There's heavy metals like mercury and the like that also get emitted. Some of it can get scrubbed. I mean, but we look at any technology, there's going to be some actual negative emissions and negative pollutants. And what we have for that is regulation. Like we have, if you're a manufacturing facility and you consume a bunch of raw material to output a product that we buy in the store, and you have a bunch of waste, there's regulation in place so that waste isn't dumped in the river. So it's important to focus on actual specific regulations where we are actually polluting the environment or destroying resources for no good reason. Or, the other things like the human ethics, it's obviously a big topic of debate, but employing, say, children to manufacture batteries or get the raw materials for batteries in the Congo, maybe we should focus, instead of, one argument is that's actually good for them and the economy, sure, but why don't we focus on improving their standards of living and work and the other things that we expect in the West, and put that in place, force that in place in order to buy their product. Those are things that we can actually do that are meaningful, instead of just, blanketing it all into carbon dioxide emissions. We can actually target things. So I mean, the New York Times piece is just one of many junk science, a bunch of garbage FUD against Bitcoin. And I do think Pierre masterfully trolled all of the sort of imbeciles out of the woodworks who didn't understand his troll and his deep meme there, by comparing, the emissions profile of a Bitcoin miner in the same methodology that they would compare electric vehicles, for example. And it really revealed a lot of, outspoken energy or environmentalists, so-called environmentalists, for being complete hypocrites.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, sorry, Sam. The New York Times is the one that started it, in the sense that they took this picture of a decommissioned coal plant and added some smog to it, and then ran it as their headline picture, which it was essentially trying to say these Bitcoin miners are causing these emissions, which to me was, terrible, dishonest statement to make. But also they had a table that was like, okay, here they are ranked by their carbon emissions. It's not like I'm the one who was trying to be deceptive. I was accused of greenwashing, and that the opposite is true. They were brownwashing us. So to the extent that there are real pollution problems, it's not on this. You could point to legitimate pollution problems, like, for example, all these cardboard boxes from unboxing these mining rigs. Okay, yeah, that's we should find a way to reduce that waste. Sure. um, that makes economic sense, right? But maybe it doesn't, because for shipping purposes, it actually we don't want to damage the machines either. So, but anyway, there's that, and then there's also the aspect of the cost of electricity. They said, oh, these Bitcoin miners in Texas, they're causing electricity prices to go up by 5%. Where did they get the 5% from? Because electricity prices have gone up by more than 5% in Texas. So it's actually kind of puzzling. In a way, you're like understating the electricity price increase here. Where they got it from was a black box proprietary simulation by some goofball who's anti-Bitcoin. And so it's like, okay, I can make a simulation go 5% in either direction. I can make it go 30% in either direction and defend, my inputs on that, right? Just depending on the assumptions, and here's how we're setting up the transmission line constraints, and the speed at which it would take to build additional power generation, and all these things. And I'm like, okay, where's the source code for this? Is it on GitHub for your simulation? No, it's not. Okay, why don't you look at the real data? The real data shows that the price of electricity has increased in Texas less than it has increased in the rest of the United States. Okay, well, isn't that interesting? Despite all these Bitcoin miners coming to Texas, the price of electricity is not increasing as much in Texas as it is in the rest of the United States. And then let's talk about the real reason why the price of electricity is going up in Texas and in the rest of the United States. The Federal Reserve printing massive amounts of dollars. Fiat inflation. Gee, isn't that fascinating? What about this current administration's anti-energy policies? Okay, that'd be another factor. What about Putin's invasion of Ukraine? Well, isn't natural gas prices a big input? It's natural gas prices are the critical factor for the cost of electricity in Texas in the medium term. And to say that there's so much Bitcoin mining happening in Texas that it is affecting the price of natural gas is bonkers. It's science fiction. I mean, that would be an astounding amount of Bitcoin mining happening. Maybe Steve has a different perspective, but I just don't see it. It would be cool if we had 100 gigawatts of Bitcoin mining, consuming all this natural gas in Texas. It's not the truth.
Yeah, the framing's interesting because, Bitcoin does all these things. It stabilizes the electrical grid. It actually can reduce the power prices, and it generates Bitcoin, which is digital sound money, which is something that we desperately need in the world right now. A solution to the Federal Reserve's harmful inflationary monetary policy. That's what gets generated, not carbon emissions like they try to push on us and push on the mainstream media.
You mentioned grid stability.
You could take. Oh,
yes.
Go ahead, Pierre.
Yeah, so I was at A&M. They've got a smart grid research center there, and they put me in the hot seat of operating a small electrical grid when a tornado hit the grid and took down 3 power lines and took down wind turbines, and you had in real time had to balance the grid. And so this is, basically what it's like at ERCOT, except it was a much simpler simulation. And all I had to do was right click on some load and turn it off. And to me, it really drove home the fact that if the grid operator has controllable load, that he can, or he or she, or they can solve their problems very quickly. And there is no second best. And then the only question is, how much does it cost to control that load, right? Now, if they're turning off a residential neighborhood, or if they're turning off a chemical plant, that is really costly, right? Because of all sorts of different reasons.
Yep.
If they're turning off a Bitcoin mining facility, that's a lot less expensive, like orders of magnitude less expensive. And so that's where, to me, the light bulb moment of, wow, okay, if I'm a grid operator, I want to be able to turn off Bitcoin miners with a right click and fix my problem in seconds. That could cause disaster, brownouts, blackouts, take down the whole grid type situation. And so, and there's not really a problem of turning off too much load. I thought that was interesting as well, is that you can just go ham and turn off lots of load and you don't have a problem in that direction. And turning on power generation, that's going to take 30 minutes. You don't have 30 minutes, you've got seconds. And so that really drove it home for me that this is a tremendous utility, a tremendous benefit to the grid.
Steve, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it really is as simple as every energy system, no matter how complex, if it's a massive, interconnected grid with importing and exporting, if it's a microgrid on an oil well, everything has the same components. You have generation, transmission / distribution, and a load. Like, you generate the power and it gets to a load. If you look at any kind of industrial generating facility, whether it's like wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, nat gas, coal, or anything else that can or come into existence, there's no argument that adding a Bitcoin mining load that is controllable, that the owner, whether he is the power plant or some third party, there's no argument to be said that adding that at the power plant or anywhere downstream will cause prices to go up. It is a demand on that power, but it's also a demand on all the excess. So which normally will naturally, due to especially the curtailment, whether that's gluts of gas or gluts of wind and solar electricity, the Bitcoin miner can go after that excess and help pay off the infrastructure cost of the entire system. I mean, in Alberta, for example, we don't have the same issues, say, Texas has, partly because we don't have the demand growth that Texas has had on their energy system, but we also have overbuilt power plants well beyond any expected near-term demand. Part of that was bad forecasting, but the nature of it is now, me as the consumer, the residential owner, I actually have to pay for the overinvestment in our grid through our distribution fees. Like, our fees are really high. And when I ask the utility, like, why are my fees so high? It's because, well, we put on all this extra capacity that is not being used. So we're all contractually obligated to pay for it. It's got to be paid for over time. It's all in this regulated system. And so we're already paying for this. And if Bitcoin miners would ramp up here in Alberta, there's an argument to be said that they would offset that infrastructure cost by consuming more of that capacity that is in oversupply and actually reduce the end users' costs. And overall, when you just look at any system, every single system has some amount of waste associated with it. Certainly a lot with the curtailed wind and solar and the natural gas gluts from associated gas production. And all of this, Bitcoin miners would go pay for this. It's extra income and revenue for those who've invested in that power distribution system. So it should end up having an effect on reducing the net costs of your average residential user, who currently have historically been on sort of the hook for paying for the oversupply on regulated markets.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk about hash rate, because I mean, hash rate's up almost 30% year to date, and I was wondering if you guys have any good theories around why. I mean, obviously the price is up, so maybe it's just more profitable. People are saying Russia's mining now. There's always a headline, Russia's getting into mining. Any theories about why the hash rate has exploded in 2023?
I'll just start, I guess. I think it's partly from just the lag effect of money coming into the market when things were booming. I think that's slowly, have ramped down projects. A lot of projects have been fully executed now, that had all that momentum of the bull run. That's part of it. I know that for a fact because I have customers who are, many, many months out to executing, but their orders were in, right? And they're taking their equipment from us. So that's like a micro example of just us delivering to customers that would have came online later. But it is definitely true that Russia we're seeing increased hash rate in Russia. I don't think anyone should be surprised when your big sales pipelines get blown up. That's going to cause an oversupply domestically, and therefore a drop in available demand. And it makes sense to me that you'd have more mining machines get imported, which a lot of those rumors I do believe have been coming from mining ASIC, like server manufacturers, shipping more to Russia and to adjacent countries. So I think that I'm not going to say pin all the growth on Russia. I just think the market is maturing, that people have a longer term view of investing in Bitcoin mining. And when you think about it, like if you're managing a big asset portfolio and you're looking for a place to park money, I know Bitcoin mining is still risky, but very few industries scale capital like Bitcoin mining does, because ignoring the fact that you will slowly get less and less on return on your investment, just because there is a finite amount of revenue generated every day. But you can buy one computer, buy two, buy four, buy more and more and more, and they all have a general exact same return on investment that generally improves the more you buy. So very few industries, like, do you not have to contract a third party customer like to get your return? Like, if you're a data center industry, for example, you sort of have to have an end user to buy your computation, whereas Bitcoin mining, you don't have to contract with anyone. You just deploy it and you get paid on a fair basis.
Pierre, any thoughts? Hash rate?
No, I think Steve hit the nail on the head. And I wish I could say it was all riot, but I know that Bitcoin mining is a very competitive industry.
What about the news about Intel halting its production of its ASIC chip? A lot of people were excited about them getting in the game, adding some more decentralization to that, the chip manufacturing aspects of Bitcoin mining industry. So what do you guys think about that? Is that big news to you guys, or do you think it's kind of more of a nothing burger? What are your thoughts? Throw it to you, Pierre.
Yeah. Well, it's no secret that Bitcoin mining is a cyclical industry. And so we'll see, production of ASICs and mining rigs ramp up and down, new entrants coming in and out. So turnovers to be expected. And I think that's overall healthy. Arguably, there has not been enough turnover on the mining rig side. We want healthy competition. But I wouldn't read too much into that. From what I understand, that Intel is going to ship ASICs and ASIC chips, and I think that's awesome in and of itself. Even if they don't have a long-term public roadmap at the time.
Yeah, through April 2024. Steve?
I think Block acquired or purchased most, if not all, of the ASICs that they have taped out and are manufacturing. That's a little further upstream on the supply chain than what I'm used to. I'm just used to dealing with brokers and buying hardware. But I do think whatever happened there, it looks like there's a buyer for that hardware, and they're going to build, continue pushing forward to build hopefully a reasonably competitive system. And it's a tough game to be in. It's extremely competitive. We're talking real high tech, right? We're not talking about like pumping oil and drilling another well, which, mom and pop can do. Whether they can do that profitably or not is still another question, but it's easier, lower barrier to entry. This is like amongst the highest barrier to entry of any, of any technology. I mean, we're talking about leading edge, node sizes and chips. I think Intel was doing it at 5 nanometer. But you're close to leading edge. It's really difficult to do that successfully and profitably. It's one thing to put, to have the intellectual capacity to even try, but to actually execute and do it profitably is very difficult, especially when Bitcoin is so volatile. You might hit the market just at the wrong time, but you have everything else is perfect, like the team, even your execution. It's just that the market wasn't perfect. And I don't know how much of that would have had to play in Intel's, on in defense of Intel and their choice to maybe say liquidate some of their plans. But it is one of those things. It's really, really difficult, and I don't know how much timing had to do with it, but I certainly, it's good to see at least investment in competitive product. And I think, there's a lot of room to improve the actual implementation of the product. There's chips, that's sort of like maybe more or less cut and dry efficiency, and just getting your costs appropriate to make a sale. But there's also the rest of the package, the mining hardware. There's the water cooled stuff that's out now. There's a lot, I think, of meat left on the bone for new entrants to come in and take market share. And I think hopefully Block and hopefully we'll see Intel maybe show maybe more reinvestment in this sector like in the future. But it's all good. More competition is good no matter how it happens.
My last question for you guys is just pretty basic. Like, when you guys look out at the mining industry over the next year or 2 years, what gets you excited? Like, when it comes to maybe even just like hardware designs, it could be regulatory developments, it could be market structure developments. What's this one thing that gets you guys kind of excited? Throw it to you, Pierre.
I've signed too many NDAs at this point. I feel like I can't actually give you a truthful answer.
Well, that's a good sign, I guess, right?
Yeah. Okay. What I can say is, I've been traveling back and forth to Texas A&M, and they've got a great team of researchers that are really taking a disciplined, rigorous approach to looking at grid balancing and demand response with Bitcoin. And obviously, I think that the data and the truth is on our side, even from what I've seen published so far. So excited to see that continue to develop and really inform the debate. I mean, so far that it's been demagoguery of like, oh, these Bitcoin miners, they're stressing the grid. It's like, what do you mean by stressing the grid? What does that even mean? Are you an electrical engineer? Like, that's not. Yeah. So we're getting some adults in the room to clear it up.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I mean, despite I'm a pessimist on, say, lobbying and getting in front of politicians to try to sway things, say, the right political direction. I'm a pessimist on that because I sort of have this view that politics just seems to keep going in the worst direction while it feeds off fiat money, unreserved fiat money. But I do think there's a lot of good efforts being put together on that front. I mean, Pierre, I've seen you do a little bit of your own work there, and I'm happy to see that, and I'm hoping to see more of that locally in Canada because we have some regulators that seem to be also venturing down the wrong directions. So that's nice to see. On the technology side, though, I'm still really excited to see more and more actual power companies integrate Bitcoin mining. Like I like using the example Talon Energy. I think they have a bunch of nuclear, I think somewhere they have a facility in Corpus Christi area, Texas. They got a nuclear project going. It's like 200 megawatts. This is badass. Like to see actual power, big industrial power plants integrate, the whole flexible load thing with Bitcoin mining, just doing it right there at the source, which is, in my opinion, what makes the most sense as someone who builds micro power plants with Bitcoin mines. So I like seeing that. I love seeing the development of the tech. Like water cooling has been. I think water cooling is going to make more of an impact than we've seen in the past, even though it's not really new tech. It's been around for many years now for Bitcoin mining even. But what I see out of the manufacturers, like there's some real good scalable equipment being made, stuff we're integrating. And other than that, I actually like to see, I know maybe my American friends right here might disagree, because I know the hash rate coming from China to America has been a great thing for Bitcoin in general. I also like seeing it go everywhere in the world. So whether it's going to Russia, whether it's going to other countries, that small country, Bhutan or whatever, I can't remember the name, investing in it, I like seeing it just distribute everywhere, wherever power is cheap. So seeing more stories like that is heartwarming as a Bitcoiner.
The country of Bhutan, I think their sovereign wealth fund just came out and said they were mining Bitcoin for years. So that's big. It's big news. Yeah. So, well, thanks, guys. Thanks for sharing your insights. It's always a pleasure to meet with some miners who are working on the ground. I appreciate everything you guys are doing. Where can listeners find you guys if they want to read more of your work?
Yeah, at Bitcoin Pierre on Twitter and Riot platforms as well. See our monthly updates there.
Steve? Yeah, Twitter at SG Barbour, Barbour, and Upstream Data is my company. Just a quick Google should find it, hopefully.
Yeah, check these guys out. Appreciate you guys coming on the show. It was really fun talking to you, and have a great day.
If you care about your financial future, you need to check out a couple of our offerings, including Swan IRA and Swan Private. Swan Private is our white glove concierge service where you get a trusted partner on your Bitcoin journey. We offer all kinds of education and research projects, as well as exclusive events to our Swan Private customers. Check it out today at swan.com/private. Also, Swan IRA. Swan IRA is the best way to gain exposure to real Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged account, like a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, or rolling over your 401k. So if that interests you, check it out at swan.com/IRA today.